At Bharat Forge Limited, we don't believe in pause buttons. 50 years ago, we hit play, and we haven't stopped since. We move, we go places, and we take our legacy with us. We started small, but our dreams were big. And we chased them tirelessly with all our heart. That's what brought us to the top. To the world's biggest names. And to people's lives. We're committed to partnering greatness, no matter where we go. From India to Germany, to France to Sweden, and now USA. We always go that extra mile and bring the best to wherever our clients are, and we never settle. Over 50 years, we have pioneered innovations across fields. Our expertise keeps sharpening. Our credits keep increasing. And our relationships, they only keep growing. We are fueled by our dreams. Inspired by the next possibility. We nurture ideas, give them wings, make them soar. We seek to build a better, smarter, and brighter tomorrow. And we will. Because that's just who we are. Driven, caring, innovative, and unstoppable. At Bharat Forge Limited, we don't believe in pause buttons. 50 years ago, we hit play, and we haven't stopped since. We move, we go places, and we take our legacy with us. We started small, but our dreams were big. And we chased them tirelessly with all our heart. That's what brought us to the top, to the world's biggest names, and to people's lives. We're committed to partnering greatness, no matter where we go. From India to Germany, to France to Sweden, and now USA. We always go that extra mile and bring the best to wherever our clients are, and we never settle. Over 50 years, we have pioneered innovations across fields. Our expertise keeps sharpening. Our credits keep increasing. And our relationships, they only keep growing. We are fueled by our dreams. Inspired by the next possibility. We nurture ideas, give them wings, make them soar. We seek to build a better, smarter, and brighter tomorrow. And we will. Because that's just who we are. Driven, caring, innovative, and unstoppable. Orge Limited, we don't believe in pause buttons. 50 years ago, we hit play and we haven't stopped since.
जी सर वॉइस आ रही है रसिका मैम के ऑफिस से हूँ.
We go places and we take our legacy with us.
हाँ जी आवाज आ रही है अब मिस्टर रसिका मैम के ऑफिस से अभी बोल रहे थे.
ओके मैम.
हाँ जी थैंक यू.
We started small, but our dreams were big. And we chased them tirelessly with all our heart. That's what brought us to the top, to the world's biggest names, and to people's lives. We're committed to partnering greatness, no matter where we go. From India to Germany, to France to Sweden, and now USA. We always go that extra mile and bring the best to wherever our clients are, and we never settle. Over 50 years, we have pioneered innovations across fields. Our expertise keeps sharpening. Our credits keep increasing. And our relationships, they only keep growing. We are fueled by our dreams. Inspired by the next possibility. We nurture ideas, give them wings, make them soar. We seek to build a better, smarter, and brighter.
Hello.
And we will. Because that's just who we are. Driven, caring, innovative, and unstoppable.
The AC on. The AC is not on for some reason.
Hi, good evening, Baba.
Hi, good evening. How are you?
Hi, CB. Good.
You're in Bangalore? Where are you?
I'm in Bangalore. Bangalore only, nowhere.
Ah,
Good evening, Mr. Kirloskar. How are you?
hi.
Hi, good
CB.
evening. Good evening.
Good evening, Mr.
Hello,
Kalyani.
Mr. Cycle.
Good evening,
Good evening.
Mr. Kirloskar. Good evening, Mr. Kalyani. How are you, sir? Hi, CB.
CB is talking. He's making a lecture, it seems.
The great part about being auto components is that it always goes behind auto. And I think you always are immaculate.
Always first.
So you don't have to speak much.
Begins with A. That's right. Nothing else.
Good evening, CB. Good evening, Baba.
Hello, good
Good evening,
evening.
Vikram.
Hi. How are you?
I'm fine.
Good.
It's so nice to see you, Mr. Kirloskar, in a shirt. We are shivering here.
Actually, it started warming up only in the last 1 or 2 days, a little bit. Otherwise, I've been wearing a sweater all day. Till about 3-4 days ago, I've been wearing a sweater all day.
North is cold.
It's very cold. Delhi is cold.
Yeah.
Hi, CB. How are you?
Hi. How are you?
Good. At last, we're going to have a meeting.
Yes. Well, this also nearly got shifted.
So Minister will not be in this one, no?
Yeah, today is the farmers' negotiation day. Yeah.
Okay.
Good evening, sir. Good evening.
Good evening.
How's the weather in Delhi? Is it smoggy or is it?
Evenings are very lucky. Mornings are completely white. Right now, it's still a little better, but it's all very bad.
We managed to get about 2 hours of sunshine today after about 4 or 5 days.
Right.
Yes.
Air quality is as bad as always.
Hi, good evening. This is Sunil Duggal joined.
Hi.
Hi, everyone.
Hi, everybody.
So we have is Amitav and Patra, no? Both of them.
Both of them. Join.
And Amita, you're setting up the presentations, PowerPoints?
Yes, please.
Okay.
Hi, Baba. How are you?
Very well. Hi. You're in Mumbai, Pawan?
Good evening, Dr. Goenka. How are you, sir?
I'm good. How are you?
Very well, thank you.
So good evening to you, Dr. Goenka. Good evening.
Hi. Seems like the same people talking about the same things to same people all the time.
Sanjay Kapoor should have been here today, so I'm a proxy for Sanjay today.
Okay.
But still the same people.
Baba, looks like the same location from where I had the last video call with you and Amit.
Yeah, my house. This is my
Yeah.
house office. But now I go to office, so.
You come to Delhi also now once in a while.
I was there yesterday and day before.
We have started our office voluntarily, starting 1st of January. And our general attendance is 5 to 7%. I think everybody is very comfortable working from home.
Yeah, we did it for almost 8 months.
And in Mumbai, there is also this problem of local trains that have not yet started fully.
Yeah, that's true.
Commuting is a problem for most people, those who don't come in their personal cars.
Yeah. CB, we know when we are going to start?
Yeah, should not be very late. Actually, we won't get inordinately delayed. Another 4-5 minutes is what I would say.
Okay.
Another 4-5 minutes, yeah.
As long as you end on time, you can start anytime. What was the work done by various subgroups, the manufacturing council? Is that how it was?
Yeah, it's actually a continuation of what you did last year. So we just continued on that, except that we were given a headline in terms of looking at all the
Regulatory.
regulatory hurdles that create or impediments that create increased cost of competitiveness or increased cost in manufacturing or reduce the growth of manufacturing. So largely the theme is all focused on regulatory impediments. So each of the groups will talk about what are the issues that they have in their businesses.
All these are different committees work. Different chairmen of different committees are also here, and each and every committee which are related to manufacturing have been working on it.
Do you even know, Chandrajit, how many different committees and councils and task forces CII has?
Why is this a public forum, by the way? You cannot embarrass me.
We are all amongst friends. We are all amongst friends.
No, there's about totally it's between 85 and no, not all. Like national, those that come under the umbrella of National Council is about 85.
55. Okay.
85.
But in all fairness, during COVID, CII really did a lot of value addition with the help of these councils and committees. And I think Government of India also took what CII has said very seriously. A lot of things were implemented or taken into consideration. That's my feel.
Yeah, we had very, very deep deep communication channels with various wings of the government. Yeah, the collaboration was phenomenal. Actually, you are right.
And again, in all fairness, the kind of collaboration that I have seen between industry and government in the last 10 months, I have not seen that before.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, that's very true. Very true.
Yeah. Now all eyes are set. All eyes and minds are set on February 1, the budget.
The Hon'ble FM has really raised our expectations very high.
Yeah.
Cutting it a never before budget, right?
Yeah.
So it has to outdo 1991.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Interestingly, there seems to be a fair amount of alignment in various industry groups and various industry sectors on what they would like to see in the budget. I'm not hearing different voices. I'm hearing same voice everywhere. Is it true, or you are much closer to it than I am?
No, absolutely true. Absolutely true. So much synergy. So much. I think it's as you said that everyone's been saying the same thing. Different committees, different sectors. The issue seems now we need to really once again go on a high drive, like we had gone some time back with the states, and all states are really not at the same level.
Yeah.
Actually, some states have taken 3 steps backward.
Yeah. That's worrying, actually. States are really worrying.
I think Baba is modest on 3 steps.
Be careful,
it's a complete reversal we see in some.
Yeah. But CB, you're very right. I think focus on states, because many of this regulatory burden is caused by regulations in the states, whether it's land, whether it's labor, whether it's factor cost related. It's all under state regulation to a large extent.
Yeah.
So we're done with all the trying to fill the time gap. Normally, before the main performer comes in, the small guys do all the sort of filling the time, which we have done now.
One discussion will keep you occupied till the end of the meeting, which a parallel subject, which is the vaccines.
See, on vaccine, it's very disappointing about the hesitancy that we are seeing in the country.
Yeah. My
brother, sister-in-law, and niece, all of them are doctors. They had taken their vaccine already. They took it on Sunday and Monday. So at least 3 data points, everybody is absolutely fine. No
Right.
doubt whatsoever.
But why is there so much hesitancy for people to come forward?
I think media has frankly overdone the possible side effects, and one or two or three cases, anything that happens got linked to vaccine. And there's a bit of a fear perhaps amongst people who are not willing to not be the first mover, I think.
Yeah, I guess it will pick up in the next week or two.
Yeah, it will. I mean, it will. And clearly a lot of very knowledgeable people are taking vaccine and talking about it. And that will help. So when all the doctors, senior doctors talk about them having taken vaccine, like my brother and sister-in-law having taken it, now at least in my family, whenever I get a chance, I will not hesitate.
Yeah.
Now the competition will also come.
And I think there is also people are becoming a little picky on which vaccine, right?
Yeah.
Because of the media reports, and I don't know enough to know what is right, what is wrong. But clearly there is that.
Yeah, that's also a media creation. That's also a media creation.
Yeah.
Great.
Interesting thing will be now that we are going to be exporting vaccines to 3 countries. So if they start taking it, then obviously our people will also think about it. I think like you said, it will pick up. It will pick up. It's just the initial hesitancy. Everybody wants to see the neighbor take it first.
I can see the secretary having joined. He's joined from his office and not from the meeting room. So the meeting room is still, chair is unoccupied, but he's pretty much there.
But I will join from here. Thank you. Very sorry for the delay. My warm welcome to you, Mr. Banerjee, and everybody else, all the dignitaries. I'm very sorry for the delay. I'll be doing it from here in my room only.
Right. Thank you.
Good evening, Dr. Mahapatra. Baba Kalyani here.
Good evening, Mr. Kalyani. How are you?
Very well, thank you, sir.
So, with your permission,
Mr. Goenka, you can.
Yeah.
Banerjee, you can start, please.
Thank you very much. Thank you. We will start. And thank you, and very good evening, and welcome everybody. Welcome Dr. Guru Prasad Mahapatra, the Secretary, DPIIT. There are many senior government officials from the DPIIT, from the Ministry of Electronics and Information and Technology, MIT, Ministry of Health and Family Welfare, Department of Heavy Industries, the Ministry of Steel, the MOFPI, the Ministry of Food Processing Industries, Department of Chemicals and Petrochemicals, the Ministry of Mines, and many very senior participation from the industry. The chairman of the CII Manufacturing Council, Mr. Baba Kalyani, Dr. Pawan Goenka, who has been the chairman of the CII's mission on Atmanirbhar Bharat, but also, of course, chairing the council on scale, which we all know about now. So, and all the chairmen of various vertical manufacturing verticals, some critical manufacturing verticals of the CII, the chairs of the councils are all present here. And the purpose of this DPIIT-CII forum is, as we know, to discuss boosting manufacturing competitiveness by reducing regulatory burden. So that's the headline that we had given to ourselves, and really like to thank Dr. Mahapatra, who has steered this very important initiative and sincerely guided us at every step in designing this consultative process and the consultative forum, along with the team of his senior officials, and the Joint Secretary Radha has been one of the stars who have really been the government industry interface in this very important initiative. We will be shortly also joined by the CEO of Niti Aayog, Mr. Amitav Khan. So we will be definitely, we are quite certain today that in this evening, in the next one and a half hours or so, that we would be able to capitalize on the presence of such some of the best minds from the government of India, and really talk about and see how we can take forward the vision of the Prime Minister, Honorable Prime Minister of when we talk about Atmanirbhar Bharat or Make in India. And as all of us know, that the COVID-19 pandemic has really affected all of us, impacted the entire world, of course, as we all have been, and continues to present an unprecedented challenge to global manufacturing by reinforcing the risk in the global supply chains. And today, India really provides a cost-effective alternative to the world by endeavoring to establish itself as a global supplier by plugging into the global value chains, and this would in turn boost our manufacturing GDP, the country, in the times to come, and bring closer to our shared vision that we have of a $1 trillion manufacturing economy. And so various verticals who have really gone into the details of how we can work together, how we can work with between the several departments of the government, and also with the industry. So this is the collaborative thinking, and today we will keep it pretty open-ended as we discuss and our way forward. I must also say that the DPIIT, through its various extensive stakeholder consultation, identified the champion sectors to give a renewed focus to manufacturing and Make in India 2.0. And then the Ministry of Commerce is also making immense efforts in moving beyond the traditional thinking of trade and moving towards a regime that benefits industry. And from CII, we have been working on these actions, on these action plans and sectors of several sectors, and has been supporting the government in the last few months, especially in driving the national manufacturing agenda. And for us, CII, at CII, manufacturing is really the center stone, and it has been very strongly, predominantly a manufacturing membership that we have. And today's forum discussion is really focused on suggestions to reduce regulatory burden, as I mentioned, in some key sectors, and including the auto sector, the auto component sector. And again, we have not only the CII committees, but the associations which represent these sectors, like the SIAM and the ACMA and the auto component sector, the chemicals, the food processing, the defense, electronics, mining, steel, and MSME, which cover significant spectrum of overall manufacturing. So this is a fantastic group, and I would really not like to delay any further and go into the discussion and look at the presentations. Dr. Mahapatra, with your permission, if I can start calling out the names of those who would be the chairs of these sectoral groups who could make presentations in those various sectors, please. If I may start with the auto sector.
Please go ahead.
Thank you.
Program. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Mahapatra. So the first sector is the auto sector, and I'll request Mr. Vikram Kirloskar, who's representing the SIAM and the auto sector, to kick off the auto presentation, please. Vikram, it seems you're on mute.
Sorry, am I off?
Yeah. Okay, Vikram. Yes, please.
Am I okay?
Yes.
Hi, good evening, Mahapatra ji and officials from the government, colleagues and friends from the industry. In the third quarter of financial year 2021, passenger vehicles and two-wheeler segments have shown some recovery, while commercial vehicle and three-wheeler segments are still in the negative zone. However, just looking at the third quarter could include an element of deferred demand of the first quarter. If you look at the cumulative numbers of the 9-month period, April to December 2020, it shows that sales of all segments are behind many years. COVID has affected us pretty hard. We have three major recommendations from the auto sector. And I've made 3 slides on these 3 major recommendations. I'll quickly go through them. The first is really sustainable growth of the industry. And to emphasize what we are looking at, I'd like to just state that emissions and safety regulations in India are now at par with Europe. We've had a series of regulations that were imposed on the industry in the year 2019, and BS Stage 5 implementation was introduced in 2020. Industry has been able to achieve this especially transition to the safety and the BS6 standard with a lot of investments, and therefore the cost of vehicles have gone up. The new set of fuel efficiency and emission regulations are slated to be introduced for the year 2022 and 2023. COVID has severely affected the R&D activities of companies, and industry has lost a lot of development time. It has also impacted manufacturing of vehicles and sales of new vehicles. Hence, to ensure that industry remains sustainable in the long run, and we have to really cover this 1 year losses and make over these 1 year losses that we have incurred in this COVID year, it is important that the second phase of fuel efficiency regulations for passenger vehicles currently scheduled to be implemented from April 2022 and second phase of BS6 emission regulations currently scheduled to be implemented from April 23. Both need to be deferred and should be introduced preferably from year 2024 onwards. This request we have made to the various ministries, but my humble request is, people have asked for various technical data and technical reasons and what are the cost implications, etc. But just a simple, sympathetic way to look at it is we've lost a year in COVID, and the industry requires time to refill its coffers and regain its strengths, and therefore this is important. Next slide, please. Our second is a long-standing request for incentive-based scrappage policy, which will have both environmental and societal benefit for the country. We have been assured that such a policy is going to be announced soon. Our only request is that this policy should be incentive-based in terms of rebates in GST, road tax, registration tax, thereby incentivizing the consumers to scrap vehicles, scrap old, bad environmentally friendly vehicles and buy new vehicles. There'll be major environmental benefits if old vehicles get quickly replaced by the new BS6 vehicles. According to science preliminary estimates, such a scheme would be revenue positive for the government, as there would be incremental replacement sales. Next slide, please. Third is the need to have smooth running of supply chains. In the recent times, supplies have become very challenging for the industry. Government could also look at exempting small volume products from the requirements of QCO, and there is also a need to expedite the approvals of items that require BIS certification, as these approvals are held up due to travel restrictions. Enough time to be therefore given for QCO, taking into account capacity of BIS to undertake plant audits. There's also a shortage of steel, and prices have skyrocketed. There needs to be a major intervention to ensure availability of domestic steel for meeting the requirements of Indian industry. There were delays in clearances from imports due to Carotar and faceless assessments. Once Form 1 is accepted for certificate of origin, the same should be acceptable by all offices pan-India and valid for 6 months. Assessment of authorized economic operators, AEOs, should also be relaxed. These are our 3 basic points, one relating to the sustainability, second relating to the environment, and third relating to smooth running of supply chains. Thank you for kindly looking at these concerns of the industry. I'm done. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Vikram. Thanks for that very quick and yet very sharp points that you have raised on the auto sector, but we will keep to the auto sector and move to the auto components and go to Deepak Jain, the president of the Auto Component Manufacturers Association, ACMA, to talk about some of the specific suggestions from the component sector, please.
Good evening, Dr. Mohapatra and all the other dignitaries on the call. It's always good to talk after Mr. Kirloskar because he's already highlighted the need of ensuring good supply chains. And of course, we are completely aligned with all the 3 themes and also the 4 points which he mentioned on basically the auto components. I think, sir, today, thanks to you, there's been a V-shaped recovery in the industry. However, something which is right now not still completely smoothened out is actually the supply chains. I've just written the headwinds which are going out because of this import and export balance which has been actually during the lockdown, we did not import. And hence, I think there is an acute shortage of containers worldwide. And of course, there's a faster recovery happening in China. So what has happened is that the freight cost has actually gone almost 6 to 7 times when it comes to container on the port. Also, globally, there is a shortage of semiconductors because during the lockdowns, a lot of basically electronics consumers as well as healthcare had actually had a huge demand, and also some of the suppliers in the developed economies had actually committed their auto capacity into semiconductors. So we see that going forward, this could have certain basically shortages as well. Also, I think Mr. Kirloskar has said that there is abnormally high commodity prices because of this demand supply shortage, and specifically steel is a concern for us. In terms of regulatory challenges, on the import front and on the export front, I will just talk a bit more in the next 2 slides, but I want to just put in aftermarket, sir, there is actually a need for quality standards, because what is happening is that the absence of quality standards, there is actually a gray market which is actually coming in. And of course, the component industry, 70% of the tariff lines are actually on 18%. However, 30% still are at 28% GST. And because of this anomaly of 28-80%, specifically in aftermarket, there is actually encouragement of gray market. So next slide, please. Coming specifically on imports. If you can go to the next slide, please. Yeah, thank you. So imports, I think there are 2 issues which are there, carotar and faceless clearances. I think fundamentally there is a lot of sensitive information which has also been required because of carotar. I think we are actually have a lot of collaborations where, I mean, say these to import now, these companies are actually not telling to get these basically information. However, our request is that once the information is accepted for the certificate of origin, then the same should actually be applicable for about 6 months. Second, in the pre-existing rules, there are, for example, in an AEO status, certain importers had to basically required now to submit BG. And before they actually had benefits of submitting BG, depending on the tierization, from 25% to 50%. And our request is that the same benefit should be extended in case of the AEO is accredited. Also, sir, in the faceless clearance, I think right now there is still a time lag on the faceless clearances. And we would request if someone can be looked into, and these time lags could actually be there and could actually be managed better. Next, please. On the export front, we welcome the RoDTEP scheme, which has been announced from 1st January. However, the rates have not been announced. And I think because of that, their exporters are unable to actually negotiate future contracts. And our humble request is that the announcement of all RoDTEP rates should be done at least latest by 31st January 2021. As well as in the scheme, I think some operators which are under advanced authorization, they're not able to actually get the RoDTEP. And here, our request also is that the exporters operating under the advanced authorization or the EOU, that actually the benefit of the scheme should not be should be passed on to them, and they should not be deprived of that. So these are my presentation. Thank you for your attention.
Thanks. Thanks very much, Deepak. So that really brings us to the end of the auto sector. We now move to the defense sector, which has been actually doing, if I may say, extremely well, and a lot of new developments in that sector in the recent past. It's a very happening sector at this point in time. And it's a pleasure to have Mr. Jayant Patel, the president of the Society for Indian Defense Manufacturers. He's also the chairman of India's of CII's Strategic Manufacturing Council. Mr. Jayant Patel, over to you for talking on the defense sector, please.
Thank you, CB. Good evening, Dr. Mahapatra. Defense has been a happening place, and I would say last about 6 months have brought in enormous number of policy changes, and through that we now have a new policy for acquisition. We also have a negative list for imports and whole lot of FDI related benefits, just to highlight few. There are few things obviously remain to be done, and it's always the dil mange more kind of a syndrome. And I would basically put it under just three themes, but some sub-points on that. The customs duty today for what is not produced in India, it's allowed at zero duty for the armed forces, also for the PSUs. But this is still not allowed to the private sector. And that's a major level playing issue. And that's where the private industry puts in a lot of cash upfront for some amount of imports which the country doesn't produce. The GST payment is something similar. For the stage payments or for the part deliveries that we make, for those part deliveries, we obviously pay out the GST, but the ministry does not pay it back, and it's paid at the end of a contract. Now, this is a huge amount of working capital that gets locked, and under today's kind of a scenario, it's a big burden on the industry. The bank guarantees is something similar. The Basel III norms and for mega programs in defense, which many of them are in pipeline. We have seen some of them being announced and some in pipeline to be announced. And for those, we see that the Basel norms will create some issues in terms of ability of the banking system to provide bank guarantees. Even for a AAA companies, the limits will start applying. There's a lot of blocked working capital. I touched upon it earlier in the form of GST as well as in the form of customs duties, and needs an immediate and urgent attention on this issue. The financing options for defense exports is something which we had requested the Ministry of Defense. Out of the all-time high foreign reserves, if there's some small portion which is put into a fund against a direct dollar import, dollar exports. So it's a dollar currency, which essentially would be made available for the purpose of credit. And against that, there's a dollar income that would come. With this kind of a possibility, there's something completely innovative that needs to be done. This is one thing which essentially is making the private industry survive today. 93% of defense exports in last 4 years have come from the private industry. And that's precisely where we require, when we compete with the Chinese and the others, we require this support, because at our normal cost of capital, or for that matter what EXIM can provide, exports are not feasible. Defense licenses is an issue which still remains to be sorted out. We have enormous amount of delays, and many of us from industry have been facing this. Besides, the security clearance actually does not come on time. It's not the issue at the DPIIT, but we know where exactly the pain point is. We had made a recommendation that there should be a time bar, and beyond that it should be deemed made available, and that's what needs to be done. There's some minor issues on the license side. If the directors of a company change, there are a whole lot of regulatory issues on that. And there are two conflicting statements at different places on the defense licenses. One says we need to be informing within so many weeks. Second says you must take a prior approval. And that's essentially where there's a confusion that needs to be sorted out. The business availability, there's a very clear process in Ministry of Defense of acceptance of necessity. And based on acceptance of necessity, the subsequent acquisition actually begins. But this acceptance of necessity is not tracked in terms of time frames, which are there in the policy. This tracking of time frames, what we recommend is if it's made available on the MOD website, and then it's equally available to everybody else, only will bring in ease of doing business, and people can actually decide what they want to focus in terms of future technologies. Of course, the level playing field remains, because the PSUs and the private sector, when we compete, the PSUs benefit from free assets, which came out of the government funding over the past, and they are at virtually nil cost. Private sector must create today an asset and service the asset through its own structure. And obviously that brings in a huge amount of level playing issue in terms of competition. Next. On the import policy, there are one or two specific issues. There are items which obviously have of late been brought under from free to restricted, and tires which go onto aircraft or the missile handling trolleys, they've just been stopped. Now it becomes an enormous amount of issue for what kind of a situation we have at border. And a lot of our partners from the industry have been complaining about these issues. Need some specific below a certain size or those kind of things, and that obviously can be then addressed. The steel import monitoring system, obviously in defense there are only high levels of alloy steels. Some sort of a change is needed on that. The SIMS registration charges, obviously that's another point. The additional documents which are not prescribed are many times asked, and that's essentially where everybody across the country need to be on the same page on that. There's NOC for each consignment. So whether we are importing or we are exporting, especially if it happens to be in those banned categories of items, becomes a bit of a problem. Even if I import and let's say I have to export, there are issues on this. Applying for NOC for each consignment individually takes a lot of time. And of course, the meetings that happen, they are far too spaced. We obviously need decisions much faster. And last, I wish to say that Vikram actually brought out that point on R&D. Defense, we will move on and create that amazing success stories in India, which actually has begun in this sector. This will genuinely benefit if the R&D incentives are in some form or other, very focused, targeted incentives are brought in. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Indeed, a very, very critical sector, defense, and that really gives us an important segue also to move into the electronic sector. And again, where India is and where India could be is indeed something that we all appreciate. And there is so much of regulatory issues involved in it, as also opportunities, which I would request Vinod Sharma, the chairman of the CII's National Committee on ICTE Manufacturing, to please quickly capture.
Thanks very much, CB. Good evening, Mr. Mohapatra. Good evening to all my colleagues here and our friends from the ministries. As CB rightly pointed out, this is a sector that has finally begun to receive what I would call very strategic attention from the government, and a whole slew of measures, starting with MSIPs earlier and specs, now PLI and electronic manufacturing cluster policy, has helped us to capture, as you can see, there is a lot of investment coming into this sector, at least in sub-segments, starting with, of course, the mobile phones. And now a lot of attention is being paid to consumer electronics, components, and piece parts. What is, no, the first slide, back to the slide, please. So the four things that I'd like to highlight: one, of course, this is an area attracting a lot of high investments, and which is why ease of compliance and companies coming in to invest or companies within India expanding need some attention. This is a very long supply chain is the characteristic of our business, and hence the performance is dependent on competitiveness of the entire supply chain, for which the import-export procedures and any delays at the ports causes us obviously a lot of disruption in that supply chain, and I'll talk about that very quickly. And finally, this sector has a very high potential to boost domestic employment. So the labor laws will play a role, and I will just quickly cover all four. Next slide, please. So on the ease of compliance, I will not read through the whole thing, but we have a couple of points. Number one, a genuine single window investment window is required, both at the center and the state level. And unfortunately, in practice, we find whether it's land authorities or it's electricity or something or the other gets stuck. And there are several issues that we keep hearing from the ground, which is coming in the way of these investments becoming functional. The second bit of compliance that I've covered is to do with, we have tried within electronic sector, thanks to our ministry, to use some of the standards as a non-tariff measure in order to be able to give some protection to the Indian industry. Unfortunately, the practice on the ground has really backfired because I think the way BIS operates, we need to rethink this whole thing. And our suggestion is that if within the ministry we can have something that works around standards, may not be the implementation towards enforcement of standards, test labs, governance, and finally also surveillance, the market surveillance bit of it, because at the moment it's frankly not working. And a lot of our companies have come back to us and said they would rather not have this kind of a CRO at all because it's not helping them in any way. Finally, there has recently been a lot of discussion around the country of origin, and there is some clarity that is required that will be mentioned. Next slide, please. On the enhancement of competitiveness, this is a business which is very design-led, and most policies today treat design houses and manufacturing as separate entities. And even the R&D incentive that was earlier available, which is not available anymore, would not sort of, that incentive was not available to the design houses. So our request is that we need to look at design-led manufacturing for electronics, specifically as a case, and we have some suggestions in the details that we are submitting. Again, there is a need for us to encourage local component manufacturing. As you know, for a long time, we've talked about assembly in electronics, and all of us are making a big effort to increase the value addition and move towards manufacturing of electronics and not just assembly. In this case, a simple rating system that on a consumer item or on a mobile phone can tell us what is the, through a star rating system, whether this item has used more local components. And the idea is to leverage the citizen's interest or his choice in being able to choose a more Indian product. And we think that merits a lot of attention and could be taken up by the ministry. The last one, we already talked about BIS. Next slide, please. On the import-export procedures, I think my colleagues have already spoken about AEO, and the recent changes have not made it easy. In fact, bank guarantees are being asked for. So even if your own component is at zero duty, if you want to import the raw material for that zero duty component, the procedure has become a little tough ever since these bank guarantees are being asked for again. This is an area where we think a relocation of a lot of factories and machine plants will happen, and hence a little more liberal approach to second-hand goods. At the moment, they're looked at with a lot of mistrust in terms of valuation, etc., and that needs to be corrected. There are some components which have a dual use, could be strategic use, and hence the SCOMET application is required. However, unfortunately, it's now applying to all components, and for each export or each bill of entry, we are required to get a chartered engineer certificate to certify that this is not for those dual use items, and that's become an extremely, so this can be done for the same component for 3 to 5 years. There's no need to do it per bill of entry or per year. And finally, on the MEIS, I think enough has been spoken already. The industry is really a little concerned because we don't know what rates we are going to get and when this will actually be given. Next slide, please. Labor laws, and this of course applies to all beyond electronics too, but specifically in our case, in electronics, there is the opportunity to employ women employees is much larger, at least in the general shift or in the morning shift. But there are some, in spite of the labor codes coming in, there are some regulations that could have been done away with, and I'll just point out just one or two as examples. For example, every company above 250 people, employees requires a creche. It does not say whether those 250 people or 50 people are women. So you could have a factory fully with men and we will still require a creche. Similarly, ambulance requirement and driver requirement for all 24 hours in a factory which is located probably in a city where there are 4 or 5 hospitals around. So there are some of these washing facilities required, even if you don't have a dormitory. So these have still found way in even the new labor codes. And our suggestion is that we need to relook at them in order to reduce the compliance required by manufacturing facilities. Last slide, please. Yeah, okay. Now that was some annexures. One point which was mentioned there was the legal infrastructure. Today also, I think it was in the papers that more than 45 lakh cases of bounce checks are still pending with courts. So I think that is where our enforcement of contract, the ranking also is pretty low, and there is a need for us to look at that so that business on B2B businesses, especially the legal aspect of it, can be taken care of smoothly. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Vinod. Thanks for that very crisp presentation. Now we move to a sector which all the other manufacturing sector needs, and at this point in time, perhaps giving a little bit of trouble with the prices. Steel, and I'll request Mr. Sheshagiri Rao, the chairman of the CII National Committee on Steel, and also the CII National Committee on TCM, and he's been leading this very, very critical sector. And I'll request him to make a quick presentation on the issues.
Yeah. Good evening, Dr. Mahapatra and other government officials. Along with me, there is also Additional Secretary from Ministry of Steel, Jessica Chobe Madam, and she will supplement wherever it is required. Sir, steel industry, as you are aware, it has 142 million tons of installed capacity in India. It is producing right now at around 75% capacity utilization. There is capacity that is available to increase production. There are certain constraints like iron ore availability in India. That's why the production is not keeping pace when there is a sudden demand which has come into India. But in the Q1, when the domestic demand was weak, the Indian steel industry exported almost 60% of the steel that is produced in the export market. Now, going into the future, in the next 10 years, India requires 300 million tons of installed capacity, as against 142 million ton right now. So 160 million ton capacity is to be created. If we have to create so much of capacity in India and also see that our Indian steel industry is competitive, then there are 4 issues which we identified, sir, which we would like to bring to our attention. Next slide, please. So steel industry, for every 1 million ton of installed capacity, it requires almost 500 acres of land. It requires large tracts of land for setting up steel plants. So therefore, the land acquisition is very, very important aspect that should be done expeditiously without any loss of time. But today there are multiple acts and there are a lot of disputes and delays that are happening. Over and above the multiple laws, there is a Forest Rights Act, Pesticide Act, and also tribal indigenous people protection. There are so many things which are required to be done. And the definition of public purpose in the current laws is so narrow, it becomes very, very difficult for private sector to acquire the land. So any greenfield project, if you see in the last 10 years, we can count on our fingertips how many greenfield projects that have come in. Whatever is happening in India right now is only brownfield expansion, sir. That is why the land acquisition is very, very important aspect, particularly steel sector, to create this capacity of 160 million ton in the next 10 years time. So in that context, what we are requesting is digitization of land records, thereby who is the owner, thereby future disputes can be avoided. That is the first request. The second request is instead of private sector, because of the very narrow definition of this public purpose, if any industrial corporations of the state, they acquire the land, they identify and get all the clearances and allocate that land for the purpose of setting up steel capacities, it can be done very quickly, sir. Over and above this land, there are environmental clearances which also take sufficiently long time. So in the environmental side, there are 3 laws majorly which are there, sir, which are mutually exclusive. One is Environmental Protection Act, another is Air Prevention and Control Act, another is Water Prevention and Control Act. Over and above that, there are a lot of other approvals which the industry is supposed to take, hazardous waste management rules, and there are several other acts are there, sir. Environment definition includes air and water pollution. But once we get environmental clearance, but we also have to go to State Pollution Control Board to get the consent to set up and consent to operate. So these approvals are taking a very, very long time. There are different administrative jurisdictions with which we have to operate. So is there any one single agency which can give these environmental clearances and also renewals of these licenses when we are operating? Then it becomes easier, sir. Time will get reduced. Time is very essential. For particularly the long gestation steel projects, which are capital intensive, these approvals are to be timely to be available to the industry. Next slide, please. This is trade related issues, sir. I will just classify this into 3 items. One is relating to customs duties on imports. There are certain critical items, inputs which are required for steel making. They are not available in India, like coking coal, refractories, and steel making limestone. So these are the items where import duties are there right now. When they are not available in India, if we have to compete with either imports or when we have to export, countries like Japan, Korea, and China, the duties on these items are not there, sir. They're very, very nominal. Therefore, whatever is not available in India, if we can make customs duty zero, then we become competitive in competing in the imports and also in exporting steel from India, sir. The second is GST related issues. GST, there is a huge amount of harmonization that is required. There are inverted duty structures in several items, particularly the services and the goods. And also harmonization is required in terms of various other items which are pointed out here, like BF slag, LD slag, fly ash. There are different classifications are here. So this GST related processes and also issues required to be addressed, sir. This is the second request. Then similarly, when we are doing exports, there are a lot of taxes which we will pay locally and also to state governments, which are not getting reimbursed at the time of exports. So we are requesting to give the reimbursement of these non-convertible duties that are paid at the state level and the local levels. Similarly, if we have to compete with the imports are not suffering these taxes which the domestic industry is paying. Whereas if we have to compete with them, there is a need for them, there is equivalent tax which is not convertible in India being suffered by domestic industry should be levied. These are the three things which we are requesting as regards to trade related, sir. Next slide, please. Environmental emissions side, sir, whatever emission standards that are being stipulated in India, they are not only comparable with European standards, and in some cases, particularly coke ovens and sinter plants, they are in fact much stringent than the European standards. So industry has been investing starting from since 1990 after the liberalization. So therefore, there is some relaxation which is required for the old plants, and new plants can definitely do it. And as and when the steel companies are setting up the projects, and there is a corporate environmental responsibility which is being stipulated, that is varying from 0.5%, sometimes 1%, sometimes even 5% is being stipulated while sanctioning the environmental clearance. So these amounts can be used for bringing technologies to reduce the emissions. That would be useful than spending only on certain specified activities that are covered, sir. Is a sizable amount where that can be used in new technologies. Similarly, this when we wanted to export, slowly, gradually, what we are seeing is particularly European Union, they wanted to bring carbon border adjustment tax. So it has to be taken up bilaterally with the European Union, particularly steel related items and steel exports. We are a large exporter of steel as a country to Europe. So if they introduce this carbon emission, carbon border adjustment tax, it will be very burdensome. So it has to be taken up to make our exports freely done in the international markets. Logistics related, sir, right of way for slurry pipeline. Slurry pipeline is a very, very effective way of transportation of raw materials. Whereas the National Highway Authority of India has set up already a scheme where we can set up the slurry pipelines parallelly on the national highways. Similar facility, if it is done by railway authorities, it will become easier to set up the railway, to set up the slurry pipelines, sir, for transportation of raw materials. Similarly, in the case of implementation of transport infrastructure for private players, if that can be facilitated in the faster manner, that will be helpful in the case of logistics. Next slide. The other items which are here, sir, outside the steel plant, again, there are a lot of facilities which the steel companies have to create, either transmission lines or water pipelines. Again, if we want to set up these facilities, the local authorities or the state government authorities wants the companies to deposit this money, and they will set up the transmission lines or water pipelines. In that case, it is getting delayed. So what is in the control of the companies is within the boundary. Outside the boundary, any facilities that are required, so those are getting very much delayed. So it has to be facilitated to get these facilities are also in place by the time steel plant gets ready. Then the judicial process, this point already made by one of our colleagues. So particularly there are a lot of litigations which are coming from the government, either in tax side or in contract side. So how do we have a very expeditious process of disposal of these cases, litigations? Thereby the cost of litigation is reduced and the industry become more competitive, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much. We now move to another very core area and a very critical area, which is mining, and I'll request Mr. Sunil Dugal, the chairman of the CII's National Committee on Mining, to give a perspective from the mining field, please.
Thank you, Mr. Banerjee. Good evening, everyone. Good evening. Good evening, CEO Yog. So there are some issues which are common, and my friend Mr. Rao also has spoken on some issues. But just to manage time, I am going to focus only on 4 issues of the mining. But just to set the context, all of you are aware also, but I am just trying to reiterate the importance of the mining and the natural resource sector. So as you know that the contribution of the mining in GDP in India is quite less compared to other similar geographies of the world. But you also know that the more than 50% of the import bill goes to the natural resources, be it minerals, be it oil and gas. So the importance of this sector for Atmanirbhar Bharat is very, very high. So to put the importance and to focus the importance of this, I'm just going to focus on four things. And as you know that the MMDR Act was amended, and as per the new MMDR Act, the auction regime has come. But even after coming the auction regime, you know that the vested right of the PL or holders are there. So under the section 10A, we are hearing that the 10A2B right will be scrapped. So there were around 500 licenses which were saved licenses which are not going to be honored. So the question is that the predictability of the policy and the continuity of the policy is a key thing for us to invite the big foreign players who could come explore and find out that where the minerals are and how these could be explored and mined. But apart from that, whatever the license have been auctioned also, many licenses have not gone into the production because of various issues which have been faced. But apart from the environment and the forest clearances, some of the other issues which have been faced that when the government has changed in some of the state government, the new governments are not ready to honor the auction or the reserve prices which were kept. And now they want to renegotiate, and they even are threatening that the licenses could also be cancelled. But there are certain mining licenses which have been auctioned, and the clarity of no-go area in these areas were also not there. So the question is that the predictability of the policy as well as when the auctions are done, so any government or any regime is there, so that there has to be predictability where the new government have to honor that all leases which have been auctioned will go into the production in a fixed time frame. But apart from that, which the mining industry is also facing, we can go to the previous slide. If when the minings are auctioned, it typically takes about 3 to 5 years time for us to take the environment and the forest clearance. So typically when the public hearing take place, there are a lot of unaffected parties, NGOs and other non-affected people who come into the public hearing, and it is requested that only the affected people should attend the public hearing. But apart from that, when we have to take the forest clearance, the compensatory forest land has to be got and purchased. And these forest land are really not available, or it takes a long time to get the rights of the compensatory forest land. We request the government that there should be a land bank which could be created, so that when the forest clearance has to be taken, it could be immediately, that land bank could be immediately allotted. But there are also degraded forests lying in the states. The basic purpose of this forest clearance is that the equivalent land of could be developed into the forest area. But if there are degraded forests, which could also be developed into the forest areas, the equivalent land from the degraded forest could also be allotted. But basically, this issue could also be resolved if the EC and the FC clearances are pre-embedded with the auction, and the auctions are done only after getting the EC and the FC clearance by the state governments. If we go to the next slide. So apart from that, the land acquisition is one of the major issues in the mining areas. Mining areas are generally located in the tribal areas or the rural areas or the forest areas. And this is unlike surface plants, minerals are where the minerals are. If the land acquisition has to take place, then we have to, take the consent of 80% of the landowners. So after the 2013 law, which was amended, it is virtually more like a private transaction which takes place. So basically, it takes a very long time, and people demand a lot of money, and it is basically because of the private transaction, it takes a very, very long time. So the request is that the state government could acquire the land before the auction, and this could be pre-embedded or it could be tagged with the auction. And then finally, one of the major suggestion from our side is that after FC and EC is taken, then we have to take CT, and then the CTO has also to be obtained. Once we have obtained the EC, probably the CT requirement should not be there, consent to establish requirement should not be there, and CTO should also be awarded. Even after the operation, every surface plant or the mines have to obtain the CTO at a fixed interval, maybe 1 year or 3 years or 2 years, depending upon the state government. It is requested that CTO should also be renewed based on the self-certification, and the audits could be done, and the people should take the responsibility, or the project proponent should take the responsibility that the self-certification, what they are doing, are the genuine, and based on the audit, the actions could be taken. Apart from that, there is a mining plan which has to be approved every year from the regulatory authorities. We also request that the mining plan should be a self-certified mining plan, which could be uploaded on a digital platform, and they would certify that it will meet the requirement of safety, it will meet the requirement of the long-term plan which has been prepared. It will also meet the requirement of the environment or the emissions. So these was the broader points from our side. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Sunil Dugal. At this point in time, I'd like to welcome Mr. Amitav Khan, the CEO of NITI Aayog. Welcome, Mr. Khan, and thank you very much for joining this very important conference. And you've been a part of this discussion for many years, and you have been a big-time supporter of this dialogue, this discussion, and it's always very it's a great encouragement for everyone from the industry to see you participate. We have gone through the sectors like the auto components, the defense, the electronics, steel, mining so far, and we have another 3 very important sectors to cover, and we would come to food processing now, and Sudhir Sitapati, who has been leading the food processing work and the food processing group, would make the presentation on behalf of the Food Processing Committee of CII.
Good evening, colleagues from industry and from the government. It's an honor for me to be as part of this esteemed panel. I think we're running a bit late, so I will, in the interest of time, skip some introductory remarks and go straight to the 5 big issues facing the food processing committee and the food processing industry. I think firstly, we've been working very closely with the FSSAI on labeling regulation, and we welcome it. We've been asking for horizontal standards which are more consumer friendly and aligned to the needs of the current times. However, the new labeling standards that are there, we have some concerns regarding transition times and some specific details. I think specifically the food processing industry is working with FSSAI, but just to reiterate that we would like a little bit more time in order to get the front of pack and back of pack labeling regime in place. I think the second slightly more important issue relates to pesticide residue levels. I think this is again broadly we're aligned with the broader objectives of the government, but I think we face problems because two organizations, one monitors the registration of pesticides and the other sets the MRL levels. So the Ministry of Agriculture monitors the registration and the FSSAI sets the MRL levels. And in case the Agriculture Ministry has approved a pesticide, but the FSSAI has not set the MRL level, the default value is of 0.01 ppm, which is practically impossible, and therefore results in a lot of non-compliance. And we would like a more coordinated mechanism between the Ministry of Agriculture and the FSSAI in setting and registering pesticides. I think thirdly, there is a need for certain rationalization of certain areas in the Legal Metrology Act. I think in particular, minor contraventions of the Legal Metrology Act attract criminal liability and nomination of a senior director as the person responsible for the conduct of the business of the company. We request that this act be decriminalized and allow the nomination of a person who is responsible more operationally to be the person in charge of legal metrology for a company. I think fourthly, there is some ambiguity and compliance issue due to overlaps between the FSSAI and the Consumer Protection Act on claims, advertisements, where both these bodies have sometimes difficult compliance issues from both these bodies, and we request that there should be a single uniform authority for all regulatory aspects regarding governing of food products, which probably should be the Food Authority, since the bulk of the regulations are done by the Food Authority. Fifthly, and finally, on operational issues, I think plastics is indeed, the food industry is far and away the biggest consumer of plastics in the country, and plastics is a big issue. And the Government of India notified the plastic waste management rules in 2016. However, various state governments have also notified their own directions and mandates, and some of these are contradictory and require multiple compliance requirements by the industry, making it difficult for us to operate. The Ministry of Environment has now issued a guideline document on extended producers' responsibility, and we request that this EPR be expedited and also aligned with states, so that there is one national guideline on plastics, which is a very big issue. So these are really the 5 operational points that I wanted to deal with. I think the most strategic point on the food processing industry is food in India is about 25% of GDP and 35% of consumption, and is far and away the biggest sector of the Indian economy. Unlike many countries, food processing, which is the ultimate way in which farmers earn more, nutrition is served, etc., food processing in India is still just between 7 and 10% by value of this industry, and probably 2 to 4% by volume. And I think there's a significant need to accelerate food processing. And when we analyze the core issue in the sector, we find that the prices of raw materials are high in India, not just on PPP terms, but even on absolute terms, with the exception of a few commodities like wheat, rice, and sugar. Absolute raw materials of agriculture is expensive in India, probably driven by relatively low yields. So a lot of the reforms in this area are very welcome, and they will help in food processing. A lot of people ask us, why can't we in the government produce more jam? And our answer is that when fruits themselves are so expensive, it's difficult to expect Indians to eat jam or ketchup or, milk food drinks or whatever it is. And I would say that if this industry is really to bloom, a competitive agriculture and competitive agriculture yields are really what is going to take this sector to the next level. Thank you very much, and sorry for the very short summary, but thank you very much.
Thank you. You went through it like a breeze, and thank you very much for that. I now request Mr. Mukundan. Mukundan, the chairman of the CII Quality Institute, and has been leading the chemicals work also within CII, to present the work which the chemical committee has done in terms of the recommendations for this forum. Mukundan, can you hear me? Mukund, yeah.
Thank you, CV. I can hear you, and hope you can hear me. And I want
Yeah.
to thank everybody and for this opportunity, and also want to thank the Department of Chemical and Petrochemical who are present there. They have been very supportive of our efforts. Very briefly, sir, chemical industry actually can go from being 6th position in the world to almost 3rd position in the world in the next 5 years. This is the trajectory we are planning for. This is the kind of target we have set along with the department, and we would want to not just achieve it, we want to go beyond it, and there are some specific support items needed. Many of these items may appear like repetition, but I think they have a specific nuance for the chemical industry. The first one is has been highlighted on this consent to establish. I think there's a very good practice in Gujarat where CT is actually automatically given in 30 minutes post State Pollution Control Board clearance. We can actually take up some of these good practices which are already prevalent in states and actually sort of make them as the baseline in terms of the kind of process we follow. And we need to be time bound. Actually, time is very, very important when we have growth and when we want to grow fast. The second element pertains to product mix clear changes. You know, chemical industry, unlike other industry, the product mix changes are very, very frequent. With some simple change of reaction, you can go from dichloro to monochloro to, you can add 3 chlorine molecules, and you can actually change the structure of the molecule, but it has no impact on effluents. It has no impact on outside. These are all reactions carried out in vessels. So I think within the bounds of environment clearance, product mix changes must be allowed. And these are actually, the changes are driven by changes in the market demand. And if government can make it automatic rather than go through elaborate process. Also, many of the chemical companies are capable of doing brownfield capacity expansion within the bounds of environment approval they already have taken. Any expansion done which is leading to higher throughput within the limited amount of environment load which has been prescribed should ideally be welcome, because the load per ton of output actually is coming down. And I think that can be made automatic. It will really help us to move fast in terms of expanding at our existing sites itself. The other element is around the environment standards, especially for marine discharge standards. These actually are varying slightly from state to state, and also if there's a common effluent treatment plant as well as if there is a standalone effluent treatment plant, these are not standardized. More importantly, sir, we would say that chemical industry on the sea coast must be encouraged, and this must be made easier for all of us to sort of establish these industries by making sure these standards are made more practical, not impractical in many ways. And this, we have several of these items which we could highlight in terms of state to state differences. Next slide, please. The third element is on logistics. Worldwide, actually, chemicals and hazardous chemicals, which are deemed to be, are usually transported by pipeline. It's been highlighted, for example, by steel industry also, the slurry pipeline, similar kind of a approach. If it is used for chemicals, it's very important. But if that is not possible, these need to be transported by railways. Today in India, bulk of the hazardous chemicals are traveling by road. And I think we would prefer as an industry to move by rail, because it is slightly more, much safer than transporting them by road. And it would also cause less harm to public at large. And if this can be allowed, and for this, railways have to make some investments at their receiving end and at the discharge end. And also multimodal operations for movement of chemicals needs a special consideration by railways. But this can actually be a very, very favorable move for railways to have higher revenue. The industry itself is more positive on moving this material by rail rather than by road. And this we would certainly welcome as a move, because it also reduces the cost for us. On the trade policy, I think one of the key things we want to say is that our big markets are Europe, USA, and Africa. And I think we don't seem to be having agreements with them. These are destination markets. And unfortunately, we have a trade agreement with the markets, with the countries which are competing with us as origin markets. So we would certainly be saying when we sign up these FTAs, India should move faster on destination markets rather than origin markets, because that is where the trade, we will be using our power to supply high quality products to these markets. In addition to this, I just wanted to highlight one additional point which is not there in this report. Chemical industry, petrochemical and pharmaceutical, these three industries depend very heavily on innovation and R&D. I think we would certainly want government to retain the taxation support they've given in the past for R&D in terms of 200% set off. I think worldwide R&D is encouraged. Korea, Japan, China all have incentive systems for R&D investments. India's spend on R&D is low. So if that may be continued, sir, it will really help us. And this request we are making at the point of budget, I think this will really move the industry to create more advanced materials which can find very competitive position in the international market. There are many other common points. I'm not going to go through them. These are specific points to the industry. Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you very much, Mukund. Thanks for bringing out those very, very critical points. And last but not the least, and the sector which cuts across all the sectors that have made presentations so far, the small and the medium sector. And I'll request Mr. Ashok Sehgal, who is the co-chairman of the CII's MSME Council, to briefly present the findings of the MSME Council's recommendations.
Thank you very much, CB. Welcome, Dr. Mahapatra, both to this session and to taking over as additional secretary of the additional charge of the MSME ministry also. And I think you will find that many of the initiatives you have taken as Secretary DPIIT will have a lot of support from the MSME ministry, which has always supported our suggestions on reducing the regulatory burden and helping MSMEs to grow. With your being the common linking point between the two, I'm sure this movement will be further accelerated. We've tried to look at the regulations which need to be removed or simplified under 4 or 5 headings. First is the approvals and reapprovals process which all of us face. Now, one thing we have been requesting for a long time, and of course it is not only a central problem, but the states have to be involved very much, is the activation of the concept of the single window system. We've been talking about it for a long time, but there are few places where it actually works in the way that you can apply for all the permissions at one place. There are also unnecessary multiple approvals required. For example, we've listed that if you go for a building approval, that is separate. And then after your building plan is approved, you have to go for fire safety, and the fire safety people will find shortcomings in there. We don't understand why it's not possible for the person who is approving your building plans to also see if the fire safety norms which are required have been implemented or not. This has to be made common. The building approval must automatically incorporate an evaluation and approval of the fire safety requirements also, so that it is not a movement in a series of steps, but both things can happen in parallel and happen quickly. The second thing is that periodically there are renewals, and every renewal means a lot of submission of data, reapplication, etc. Now, all these renewals should be automated, and there should be a provision that if the growth is along the same lines already sanctioned, and since we want the companies to grow and we want the sector to grow, modest increases of say 5% or 10% year to year should be automatically granted if there is no major change in process or resources which are being used. Similarly, many of the MSMEs are not large projects, but they are in industrial areas, industrial estates set up by the government. Now, when the industrial area or industrial estate is sanctioned, it has its own ETP, it has its own infrastructure and various other provisions, which have already been studied and approved when the industrial area was sanctioned. So the rules for units which are being set up within the industrial areas and industrial parks must be very much simplified and much less stringent, because the common facilities which exist in these industrial areas must be taken to apply to the units which are within that industrial area without requiring reapplication, reevaluation. So this would help industries to quickly set up without having to go through a lot of reapplications, resubmission of data, most of which is in any case already available in the government domain. Linked to this is the question of simplified reporting. Year-to-year reports are there, and duplication of submissions are required by different departments, each one of which wants it in its own format. Now, I think with the current status of digitalization, it is easy for different departments, different ministries to access the common database and bring out the data in the format which they need for carrying out their duties of regulation or oversight. So, for example, the linkages between customs, DGFT and banks for import and export still requires a lot of paper movement. When DGFT will give you an advance authorization, it's got to be physically submitted to the customs. And similarly, when you meet your export obligation, the documents have to be physically submitted back to the DGFT, and which also opens up the possibility of somebody tampering with the physical paper, which would be completely avoided should there be digital sharing of such databases. A lot of this data exchange, including with GST, etc., should be done along the lines that the income tax department, we feel, has done so successfully, where you submit your data and they already have a database of what is your tax deducted at source, etc., and they match it up, auto-populate it, and you get your response very quickly. In the last income tax return for the last year, I would like to share that my son claims that he got his income tax refund within 3 days of filing his income tax return online. Now that is tremendous, and we'd like to see all departments see that as a benchmark and an achievement which they must emulate and see how it was done and do it for their own returns and assessments. Similarly, when we talk of reducing inspections, there is a fear that self-certification cannot be allowed without certain amount of inspection. I think that we must differentiate between two things. Self-certification should allow units to continue to operate or to begin operation. That does not mean that there is no check. The checks and audit is a different thing which can happen at a different point in time, but it need not be an obstacle to starting or commencing operations which are self-certified. So the acceptance of self-certification should be more wide. Of course, not accompanied with necessarily physical inspections in every case, but audits as what should be done as and when there is seen to be a risk. The next point, major heading we have is on encouraging growth. Now, I've already spoken of industrial units, and we think that if there are more plug and play units with approved building plans, approved common facilities, this would be a great stimulus to SMEs coming up in this. In terms of startup, I think there is another parallel side which is often ignored, that many new units would start, many of them will fail because they are startups, they're new, not each one is 100% guaranteed to succeed. There is no clear and easy exit path for an entrepreneur who has started an enterprise to decide that it is no longer viable, he wants to close it down, and it becomes a very tortuous method for him to close it down. So some thought and a quick procedure for this has to be thought out and given. Lastly, there are a lot of minor points which we have collected from our members, almost 200 small points, which we will be submitting later, which there's no point in talking in a meeting like this. But we find it very encouraging that the Gujarat example given by Mr. Mukundan right now, the consent to operate happens within 30 minutes of getting your environmental clearance. That is tremendous. We would like to see these kind of good practices with help of DPIIT, which it has been doing in ranking the states, being shared more widely across states. Not only that this is happening in Gujarat, but how is it happening so that other states can say, hey, we can do this also. So that's one. The other side is another point which was mentioned by both Mr. Vinod Sharma and Mr. Sheshagiri Rao, is the enforcements of contracts through special commercial courts. There is the Delayed Payment Act of which is supposed to have MSMEs get payment within 45 days. It is not so effectively happening within 45 days, and somebody doesn't pay up, the remedy for that through the courts takes forever. So special commercial courts that will enable quick resolution of cases of enforcement of contract, which, as you must be aware, India has one of the poorest rankings in the World Bank rankings, is in enforcement of contracts. So if that could be given some attention, I think that itself would be a big relief to MSMEs. So thank you very much. These are the few big points which we want to say. And as I said, we'll be submitting more detailed, smaller points, which we hope you'll find it easy to accept. Thank you so much, sir.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much. So that completes our sectoral presentations. And before I move on to Mr. Amitav Khan and Dr. Guru Prasad Mahapatra, we have two very important industry stalwarts to talk to us. First, I'll turn to someone who has been leading this manufacturing work of ours till last year, and is now working on and leading another very important facet of our work, which is actually completely aligned to this evening's discussion, which is on Atmanirbhar Bharat. And of course, all of us know and keep seeing him now as we do not exactly know which side he represents, the government or industry at times, where he chairs the scale meetings. Probably he will tell us that as he speaks now. Dr. Pawan Goenka.
Thanks, CB. Either both can own me or both can disown me. So it depends on what I'm going to say in the next 5 to 7 minutes. So delighted, obviously, to be at the second DPIIT-CII National Consultation Forum on Manufacturing. The first forum we had was on January 15th in 2020, and I believe it was very successful. Both Dr. Mahapatra and Mr. Amitav Khan were present for the concluding session, which was a marathon session with Minister Hon'ble Piyush Goyal. There were many takeaways from that forum, and many of those are under implementation right now. One of the things that came out of that forum was the formation of the scale committee that Chandrajit mentioned. And this committee, which has members from industry, from the government, and from the associations like CII, is working on 24 different sectors, where 6 to 7 members from the industry for that sector, association members and line ministries are participating. Out of these 24 sectors, we have working on 15 now to take them forward, and looking at very specific issues such as what got talked about today. And we believe that if we do things right, there's a potential for us to add $300 to $350 billion to manufacturing value add in India. Now, as we look at these sectors, the main thing that comes out on what we need to do is to make Indian manufacturing more competitive than what it is today. And when we compare sector after sector after sector, we find that our cost overall, landed cost, is higher than China, higher than Vietnam, and many newer manufacturing countries that we have. And the difference is as much as 8 to 10%. And the reason we have the competitiveness, I think, can put into 3 buckets. One is the scale of manufacturing in most industries is nowhere near what we see in these larger manufacturing economies. The second one is the overall factor cost that we have in India. Cost of power, cost of logistic, cost of money, cost of labor, cost of land. Labor, of course, is still cheaper compared to most countries. And the third one is the cost of meeting the regulations. And today's interaction is specifically focused on cost of meeting the regulations. And my colleagues from 8 or 9 sectors have given, I believe, very crisp and to the point sort of enumeration of where that particular sector has issues. And I'm sure that Dr. Mahapatra, Mr. Amitav Khan, and other related ministry officers will not find anything that will surprise them, because these things have been talked about several times in different fora. And I'm sure Baba will summarize some of these, but there are 2 or 3 that stand out to me as I listen to these presentations, which cut across the sectors. One, of course, is the concern on MEIS going away. And MEIS was giving 4 to 5% benefit for export. And given that as it is, we are not cost competitive, the 4 to 5% may not sound like much, but it is making many sectors not being able to export because we cannot just manage the taking away of the MEIS. And government, I know, is working on sort of different options for it. And our request, as has already been said, is that we need to bring many of these options on the table fairly quickly before we lose our sort of export momentum. The second one that I have seen that cut across many sectors is QCO, which is becoming very difficult for many industries to incorporate because of the COVID situation, where the consultation or the reviews or visits could not happen. The third one that I heard in many sectors is legal metrology. Now, legal metrology is done with the right intent, obviously, but it does become nuisance for many of the sectors where we spend far too much time on trying to manage legal metrology or sort out legal metrology than the benefit that we might get out of it. Now, clearly, there is I don't think there'll be disagreement that anyone will have present here today, that many of these regulations or in fact, all the regulations have been put in when they're put in with the right intent while trying to resolve an issue or solve a problem. But many of these are having leading to unintended hardships. And I think it's very imperative that the concerned ministries take a very hard an aggressive look at these and remove what is not adding value. Every regulation will have some positive and some negatives. Where the negatives are outweighing the positives, I think we need to take a look to see to remove them. And as you go through these presentations, you will find you will see the burden of regulations being very high on some of the sectors. The concern that I think is coming from the fact that in many cases there are multiple departments of Government of India that are involved in making regulations. Sometimes the regulations turn out to be overlapping and sometimes even contradicting and leads to extra burden. The state and central regulatory situation also makes it difficult because sometimes state have their own regulatory power and in fact in some cases they again become overlapping or contradictory, specifically when we have to meet different regulations in different states for the same product. And to be able to develop that product to meet the regulation in different states becomes very, very difficult. So our plea today is to not asking for anything unreasonable. Just look at which regulations are not really serving the intended purpose, or the negative impact or unintended hardship that they're causing is very, very high, and try and either modify or remove the regulations. And I also know from, as Sanjay said, he doesn't know whether I'm on the government side or industry side. I also know that in many cases, even when there's an agreement amongst the deciding authorities of government to do something about regulation, the process takes its own sort of sweet time in it getting resolved. So I think somehow speeding up that process and trying to do it faster is also an order of the day. Right now, I think industry is sitting at a very sort of good takeoff point, where a little bit of push, little bit of help, little bit of partnership with the government, not little partnership, a lot of partnership with the government will really bring in that Make in India vision that we had, as was talked about in 2014-15, Atmanirbhar Bharat, as is being talked about today. So all the right people are present here today. Our request to you is to take a very hard look at what we have talked about and try and make some of these things happen. Thank you very much. So Chandrajit, I am industry or government? Can you pass the judgment?
You have balanced both. Thank you. So that was a great presentation, and thank you very much for that, and thank you very much for leading and really facilitating this discussion over the last few months between the government and the industry. And I think this particular collaboration that we have seen in the last few months between various wings of the government and industry has been of great value, motivation, and result and outcome for us, for all of us. With that, I now turn to the chairman of the CII's Manufacturing Council, again, a person who has led many institutions and who has created many institutions within and outside of the Confederation of Indian Industry, and someone who has actually given the shape to this particular presentations that we have seen over the last few minutes. I'd now like to invite Mr. Baba Kalyani, who has really led this work from CII and spent a lot of time in understanding the regulatory burden across all the sectors. And he would like to make a small presentation. And this particular presentation of his is a result of his discussions with sectors across, as well as almost over a month in the identified sector. So over to you, Mr. Baba Kalyani.
Thank you, Chandrajit. Sri Amitav Khan, Dr. Guruprasad Mahapatra, other members, respected members from the government, my colleagues on the Manufacturing Council, Dr. Pawan Goenka. Great work that was just showcased in the last 1 hour from all the sector chairs. I think it's a good time to just take a review of what's been happening in India and how do we move forward in terms of boosting manufacturing competitiveness by reducing regulatory burden. I think over the last few years, the government has taken several supply side and demand side interventions to address India's competitiveness and attract investments in the country. The Make in India initiative set the tone, and the Ease of Doing Business initiative and the target to be within the top 50 nations gave an outcome-oriented approach towards tackling the challenges. What followed was a slew of initiatives like the GST, the Insolvency and the Bankruptcy Code, liberalized FDI norms, IPI reforms, liberalization in the defense sector, amongst others. I personally believe just when India's story was accelerating, backed by a positive impact of all these reforms, we got stuck in this COVID-19 pandemic. But here, I think we all need to acknowledge the government for not getting bogged down by the pandemic and sudden economic distress caused due to the lockdowns. Instead, the government led by our Honorable Prime Minister took this crisis head on and converted this crisis into an opportunity. Some game-changing reforms in strategic sectors as part of the Atmanirbhar Bharat Abhiyan and innovation schemes like the production-linked incentive schemes have been conceptualized and are being introduced. These are expected to give a huge impetus and fillip to the demand generation, thereby the overall manufacturing value add and thus the Indian economy. Some green shoots are already visible, but the upside is immense. Manufacturing contribution is still languishing around the $360–400 billion range, and the potential is getting to $1 trillion economy in the manufacturing sector. As you are all aware, global manufacturing sector is undergoing a mega transformation, and COVID-19 has actually reset and accelerated this transformation. And this is even more relevant in our sectors like the automotive, the auto components, the chemical sector, the electronic sector, and the MSME sector. If India has to compete with other large manufacturing destinations like China, now even Vietnam and Bangladesh, apart from the new manufacturing investments that are happening in the United States and Europe, we have to accelerate our regulatory reform mechanism and bring in speed and efficiency. During the COVID times, I'm certain that all of you would agree, the government, us, the industry, academia, the scientists, the research institutions, all came together seamlessly, broke their silos, made quick decisions to rapidly execute with outcomes in mind and monitor the progress. COVID has forced us to break the silos and operate seamlessly using a virtual digital platform. In fact, in many ways, increased productivity. Tackling COVID has shown us the way that we can bring change better than many other nations. While we have heard all the other speakers representing the various sectors in the last 1 hour, I wanted to focus on the common challenges and regulatory burdens we face across the sectors in the manufacturing industry. I strongly believe that we need a new thinking and a paradigm shift in our approach to address these challenges, not just small tinkering of rules and regulations, but we can take a fresh look and make bold changes wherever necessary. Some of my colleagues in their presentations have talked about many of these things, so I will just make a simple summary. First, labor laws. I think a lot has been talked about labor and flexibility. We need to bring in flexibility to create and adapt and restructure our workforce to enable digital manufacturing. This is coming whether we like it or not. It's pretty much similar to the insolvency and bankruptcy code that was created in 2016. I think we need something similar in labor laws. In cost of land, although cost of land was talked about in the steel sector and the mining sector, these are large sectors where they need large chunks of land. But a large part of our manufacturing really happens in the small, medium to a little larger than medium sector. And in these sectors, the cost of land keeps on going up because of artificial inflationary barriers that come due to regulations. And one of those things is something to do with ready reckoner rates. So if you have a land of an industrial estate and there is some buildings coming around that, the ready reckoner rate keeps going up. And if an SME wants to buy 1 or 2 acres of land, his cost of land is almost equal to the cost of his project. Third, single window system. I think everybody has talked about single window system. I think we need to have a consistent countrywide implementation of an online single window system to be on par with global standards. This is also extremely important if we want to make India a major part of the global value chains. And therefore, I think doing that is very important. The next slide, please. There was a lot of discussion from the MSME sector on compliances, certification, recertification, etc. So we need to bring in some process where there is some trust in the manufacturing ecosystem to reduce this compliance cost by creating a third party or a self-certification process. Another point that's important, everybody talked about R&D and getting incentives for R&D. I think that is important, especially if we want to keep making progress in terms of our technology. But for a lot of small, medium to a little larger than medium industry, a big opportunity lies in the ability to work with our existing research labs, whether they are in the DRDO, whether they are in the CSIR, whether they are in the Department of Science and Technology. And one of the problems for industry to work with these labs on a very transparent and open basis is the GFR regulations that these government labs have to follow to work with industry. So something has to be done to make this a little simpler and easier so that the big research facilities that we have created can be put to much greater use and create a multiplication factor in terms of new technologies and research. And the last point, I think almost everybody has mentioned this, is enforcement of contracts. We've been talking about this for many years, and somehow this issue continues to remain bogged down, and whether it's for a small-scale industry or whether it's for a big steel plant or whether it's for a mining sector, this issue of enforcing contracts continues to be a big problem in terms of the regulatory burden. My personal belief is that if we can be counted amongst a few large nations in tackling the COVID pandemic, which has now become a reality, I think India has done a great job in terms of handling this. And all of you in the government, in our scientific community, in our medical community, in our research community, and of course, many in the industry have been associated with this, working seamlessly. And I'm certain we can have the same belief that we can be in the top 20 nations in terms of doing business. And I think this is extremely important if India needs to be an effective player in the global value chains, which is will allow manufacturing sector to grow. And the last thought that I will share with you, I'm sure all of you saw this yesterday, the Team India in Brisbane has demonstrated that nothing is impossible. Thank you.
Thank you. Indeed, nothing is impossible. Thank you, Mr. Baba Kalyani, for that for those comments and for those remarks and that presentation. Very, very useful. With that, we come to an end of the presentations and comments and remarks from the industry side. And I would now turn to the two leaders from the government. And it's a pleasure and honor to really invite now Dr. Guru Prasad Mahapatra, the Secretary, DPIIT, to give his special address. And this particular forum is actually a joint forum of the DPIIT with the CII, which has been focused on boosting manufacturing competitiveness. And the title today, of course, which was selected, was to reduce regulatory burden. And we have spoken about it. And I must say that Dr. Mahapatra has been really leading some of the very key initiatives with regards to manufacturing. And I must admit that the work initiated over the last 12 months has been extremely important for the industry and, of course, the entire economy. And DPIIT has really played a stellar role during COVID to ensure the sustainability of supply chains and keeping some of the process industries afloat. And it's been a great pleasure and honor working with Dr. Guru Prasad Mahapatra, and it will be great to hear his comments and response to the presentations as well as his inputs on the way ahead. Dr. Mahapatra, please.
Thank you, Dr. Banerjee, for your very kind words. Mr. Baba Kalyani, Dr. Pavan Goenka, Mr. Kirloskar, the very, very distinguished panelists that we have in today's evening discussion on how to boost manufacturing competitiveness by reducing regulatory burden. Since I'm going to be followed by CEO Niti Aayog sir, who is a veteran, probably, and I don't think there are many civil servants in the country who understand industry and trade better than him. So I would leave the burden of speaking on this subject to him, because in view of his vast experience and his exposure to the subject. But I would like to give certain comments as the Secretary DPIIT, since you are co-chairing CII, on some of the discussions that has happened today, the focus of today's discussion. As we all know, our focus is to how to boost the manufacturing. And when we are talking about boosting manufacturing, we talk about boosting the competitiveness of Indian manufacturing. And that is where we probably realize that we are definitely not as competitive as, say, the manufacturing in the country bordering us is. All of us realize, but we in India as well as the rest of the world realize how uncompetitive even some of the most advanced economies were in manufacturing. When the COVID entered and the whole world saw such massive disruptions in the supply chain, and they all realized that they've ceded manufacturing to a particular country. Though in India, we have been speaking about Make in India and giving a boost to manufacturing, probably we realize the importance of it in the post-COVID situation. And that's where Honorable Prime Minister spoke about Atmanirbhar. And we are all working on that. The issue here is, to boost manufacturing and to make Indian industry competitive, there are issues of quality, QCOs, quality control orders, boosting the quality. Let's leave it aside. There's the issue of the manufacturing of a scale that makes it competitive. Let's leave it aside for a moment. I'll only focus on how to reduce cost. There are other factors of reducing cost, cost of land, cost of power. I'm not also touching on that. I'm only focusing on a major cost for Indian industry is the compliance burden cost. We started attacking this through the ease of doing business work, which was started in right earnest when Mr. Amitav Khan was occupying the current post that I am occupying. And India has made significant strides in that. All of you are witness to it, how we've improved our position in the World Bank ranking. But today we find that the compliance burden that the Indian industry and the Indian trade and a citizen in general in India faces because of certain practices in government, both central government and state governments, particularly the presence of antiquated acts, obsolete acts which have no relevance in today, doesn't add value to the governance system, doesn't add value to the trade and industry. The citizen industry interface that is so complicated. For example, whether you're going for a driving license, you're going for a tax registration number, you're going for a company registration, whether the procedures are very easy, even though it is online, whether that online process is very easy to do. So, or third is the compliance burden that we have identified in various acts, rules, regulations, the circulars, which emanated from those acts and rules. Today, compliance burden reduction is the most important activity in Government of India. The importance of this is such that the Honorable Prime Minister took a specific meeting on compliance burden reduction where he had called CEO Niti Aayog was there, I was there, and he called 8 to 9 leading departments which contribute the most to compliance burden. Most of the ministries of departments of the Ministry of Finance, our Ministry of Commerce and Industry, Ministry of Health, because a lot of issues originate from whether it's food processing or pharma or chemicals. A lot of these issues emanate from that, and including environment protection regime that we all spoke about. What we have done is we have moved very systematically on that. In fact, CII is witness to this. We have involved CII and other leading trade bodies to specifically request them 3 things. Kindly identify the compliance burden which is arising out of a particular act, rule, regulations, the circular, and we are identifying that. CII has already shared with us almost 200 to 300 such compliance burden areas which are originating from either a central provision or a state government provision. And I'm very happy to share with you that we have shared all these with the relevant ministries and the state government. The Cabinet Secretary himself reviews compliance burden reduction activities in almost 2 to 3 times a month by calling those meetings of Chief Secretaries of States as well as the Secretaries of the Government of India departments. So let me assure you through this meeting today to all the distinguished participants that compliance burden reduction remains a topmost priority of the Government of India today. And as I gave the example of how Honorable Prime Minister spent almost 2 hours on discussion on this. So what has now resulted is a twofold program. One is central government ministries have identified and shared with us. We have created a portal actually in the DPIIT, and CII has access to that portal, not only to load new compliance burden items, but also to see how these are being addressed. And our Joint Secretary Radha is also participating in this discussion today. I'm sure CII and particularly people in CII who are involved with this exercise with us, they are aware of this creation of this portal and the way it is being populated. So we have identified those activities to be undertaken by the central government ministries as well as the state governments to reduce compliance burden by carrying out the corrective action by 31st March. That's the first target. So almost 7,000 odd compliance burdens have been identified by the central ministries as well as the state governments to reduce compliance burden. To give a simple example, to start a restaurant which in a city, today those multiple approvals you require from the state police, from the state health department, from the urban local body. This is a typical case of a compliance burden. A lot of these examples that were given today by the distinguished panelists when the reports were being presented, whether an auto or an auto components or electronics, steel, mining, food processing, MSME, I was listening to all this very carefully. And I saw that actually most of the suggestions that the distinguished panelists made all pertain to compliance burden reduction more. I am not competent here, nor am I going to talk about whether we should increase the, we should restore the income tax provision that was there on R&D expenditure. Because I can only share with you that the Ministry of Finance thinks that with the way corporate taxes were slashed in September 2019, and their focus is to do away with as many individual exemptions that exist in the corporate tax and the income tax regime, make it a very low tax system, but minus multiplicity of exemptions that we had. In fact, the exemptions itself add to a compliance burden. In fact, as a salaried government servant with no extra income to show, I have not been able to fill up an income tax return, and I always take the help of a chartered accountant to file a salaried individual's income tax circular return. So that would, so let us not talk about that, those tax reduction, but while the reform agenda is going on, we have seen significant reforms in the taxation regime with the introduction of GST. A lot of labor reforms are coming up. The insolvency regime has been reformed. A lot of activities have happened there. And the agrarian reforms have just set in. And the reform agenda of Government of India will go on. But what we are focusing now in Government of India, and DPIIT is the nodal department, I would be very happy to work on many of these suggestions. These suggestions actually should be shared with all the relevant ministries. They are all listening to this. They are all participating in today's forum. And from DPIIT, I can assure you that we'll take up these, treat this as compliance burden, and ensure that by 31st March, and the second one is to coincide with the 75th year of India's independence, the 15th August 2021, with these three verticals we want to attack. One is the reduction of compliance burden per se in various central and state acts, rules and regulations and circulars. The second is the simplifying further the citizen government interface, whether it's online or offline. And third is removal of antiquated, obsolete acts and regulations which do not add value. This is how we are working, and I will be very happy to. We are already proactively involved with CII, but I'll be very happy to work on many of the suggestions that were made today in the presentations on those 9 sectors that we saw today. I have nothing else to add, but I strongly feel that while we cannot guarantee that the cost of power will come down, the cost of land will come down, because there are many complications involved in that. But certainly compliance burden reduction is something which the government, if it sets its heart on, can certainly achieve. With this, I'll conclude here, and I will my sincere thanks to CII for joining hands with us in arranging this very interesting discussion forum today. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Mahapatra. Thank you for your understanding, your extremely practical approach, for your partnership, this partnership we value with the DPIIT, for your recognizing and appreciating the issues which have been raised by the 9 sectors, as you said. You have been always a person of action, a person who has always focused on seeing how we can get some things done, some changes done. And we really are grateful to you for this partnership, to you and to the DPIIT. You mentioned Joint Secretary Radha, who has been a great partner in this process over the last many months. And you have actually done one of the most critical things. Is today we have the presence of so many outstanding and important ministries and departments of the Government of India present over here, understanding and discussing the pain points and the issues that the industry is raising. This itself is of great value to us, and we really appreciate this partnership. Your points that you mentioned on compliance burden, or simplifying the citizen government interface, or obsolete acts, for focusing on that, all of this are really music to our ears, and we would like to work with you as we go ahead. So thank you very much once again, Dr. Mahapatra, for this. I'd now like to turn to, again, a very important person, a person with whom we have been working for decades in many capacities over the last, across sectors, across issues. And today it's great to have this outstanding individual, Shri Amitav Khan, the CEO of NITI Aayog, to be here with us. His understanding, his empathy, if I can say, when he talks to the industry, and the type of directions and the guidance and inputs that he has always given to us as industry and as CII have been of great value. And personally, of course, I have benefited so much in the type of counsel and the guidance that he has given. So it's great to have you, Mr. Amitav Khan, and for with us. And thank you very much for sparing your time. And we now look forward to hearing you and to your inputs and guidance. Thank you. Over to you.
So, Chanjit, let me first compliment CII for the, I was very intently listening to the presentations, and some outstanding presentations have been made. And we'll be very happy to have detailed copies of this. I think you should make them available to both DPIIT and to NITI Aayog, and we'll do a detailed examination and pursue action on them. You're very fortunate to have such outstanding leaders who've done detailed work on this, and I think it's important and that government works hand in hand with CII to take this forward. I think it's also fortunate that we have Guru Mahapatra as Secretary DPIIT, because he's extremely positive, and by nature and by heart he's a He's someone who wants to break down all rules and regulation. So we've been actually working in partnership with DPIIT, and I'm a firm believer that regulatory environment needs some very radical changes, not merely at center but at state levels. So there was a study done by Manish had written something, and then we examined that further. Manish Sabarwal had done something, and then we examined it further. And we were trying to look at the web of, the whole web of the universe of laws, the universe of compliances, and the universe of filings which a businessman has to go through. And at Niti Aayog, we initiated and very intensely involved systematic, scientific and pragmatic approach to the study of regulatory framework and regime. And I put a crack team of professionals within Niti Aayog, young professionals, to do an analysis of the regulatory burden, and they interacted with all industry associations. And then we carried out a granular level deep dive exercise for 5 pilot states: UP, Tamil Nadu, Karnataka, Gujarat, and Maharashtra, which I think are the key states. And the methodology adopted a mix of industry consultations, direct talks with the industry representatives association, and these results have been shared by us with the states, and the presentations were made to the chief secretaries. So let me give you a perspective of what is happening in India, and this will give you a real feel of what's happening. So first is that there are 678 laws enacted by Parliament, and there are 858 state legislative assembly laws. There are 1,536 laws which impact businesses. And the compliances at the union level, their union level compliances are 25,537 still. At the state level, there are 43,696 compliances, total of 69,223 compliances which the businesses have to go through. And the filings, the micro, so there is a mega web of laws, there's a mini web of compliances, and there's a micro web of filings which has to be done. And the filings are 2,282 at union level, 4,336 at state level, total of 6,618 filings which have to be done. And then we got down to the states. So let me give you the performance state-wise. In Gujarat, there are 271 filings, there are 2,736 compliances, and the act and rules are 19 acts and 21 rules. And this has all been made available. I've had interaction with the chief secretaries, and I've made them aware of this, and I've given them our study so that they can start, their industries secretaries and their whole team can start working on this. Maharashtra has 210 filing, 2,922 compliances. There are 29 acts and 43 rules. And Tamil Nadu has 322 filings, 2,136 compliances, acts, rules are 22 acts and 36 rules. Uttar Pradesh has 220 filings, compliances are 2,054, acts are 1,832, and Karnataka has 217 filings, 1,980 compliances. It has taken us about 6 months to track this. 6 months of about 6 young professionals working on this to track this state-wise. And we have then had a meeting with chief secretaries where we made a presentation and we made this available to the states. Now, my view is that there is some things which center has to do, and I think we are all acting on that. One of the things which we have done is how to decriminalize many of these offenses which have been put as criminal, which are not criminal and civil. And actually, both Guru Mahapatra and me have been involved in this, and we are pursuing it with corporate affairs and everything. But my view is that all these compliances need a de novo look at this completely, so that they can be completely overhauled at the state level. Unless that is done, these compliances will remain. We can keep improving in World Bank ease of doing business, and I'm being very honest about it. And we can, because we'll improve there, We can do several things, but states have enacted a vast number of laws over the years, which has led to compliances and filings. And they were all made during they've all been made during a period when everybody wanted, the socialist era of compliances, and they've added and added and added, and unless and when we don't dismantle them completely, it will become very, very difficult. The ease of doing business of the states will not take place. Mr. Mahapatra, because of his initiative, may help us to improve or may ease down, but we need to crack this at the state level. I think that is where the real action is. And my suggestion to you is that we will work in partnership. Let's crack this in 5 states. If you are able to crack this in 5 states, the game is won. And you need to really put this whole work that we have done. There, a lot of hard work has gone into this. We are willing to present it to the states. We've given it. I think the pressure must mount. What we have done, we'll make it available to you. The pressure needs to be mounted by CII in these 5 states where we have worked: Gujarat, Maharashtra, Tamil Nadu, Uttar Pradesh, Karnataka. And we should say that we'll revisit this in the next 6 months and see what more dismantling has been done. And let me tell you, what we have done should be, while I have interacted with the Chief Secretary, the private sector must pursue this at the level of the Chief Minister and say that dismantle this. Otherwise, however hard we try, the web of regulations, the web of acts, and the web of compliances are so enormous that we'll only end up doing marginal tinkering. This is my belief, and I'm being very honest about it. And we need to crack it big time, but not. I think the main action is in the states now.
It's really great that you have made these points, and thank you for your understanding and thank you for your comments. And you have given us an agenda for future, and we will work with you and DPIIT to see how we can work with the states. Our presence in the states are strong, and in fact, one of our discussions that we were having just before you came in, before we started this session, is how do we take this mindset to the states of change, and how can we work with this? And thank you for mentioning the 5 states as pilots. We will run it with the 5 states, and we will take all the points that you raised forward. But before we conclude this evening, I would request the CII manufacturing chairman, Sir Baba Kalyani, and if I could also request Dr. Pawan Goenka, both of them, to give very quick words of response to these 2 very, very important personalities, Mr. Amitav Khan and Dr. Guru Prasad Mahapatra's comments. A quick wrap up by both you, Baba, and then with from Pawan.
Should I start first?
Yes, please. Yes, please.
First of all, like to thank Sri Amitav Khan, Dr. Mahapatra, for being with us and spending so much time, and inviting all the other officials from other ministries. I'd like to thank our chairs for different industry groups for really putting in a lot of hard work to create this whole forum, the DPIIT-CII forum, for looking at the regulatory burden. But I echo the words that Amitav Khan just talked about. We cannot have a little bit tinkering in all this. We need to look at a new thinking, a paradigm shift, and it has to happen at the state levels. The whole problem is really at the state levels. And I think we will certainly take this forward from both an industry perspective as well as from CII. And for Dr. Mahapatra, I think he made some very clear directions in terms of how and which area we need to get these regulatory burdens reduced. And I'm glad that there is a target date of 31st March and the 15th of August, India at 75. And I think if we all work together, remove all the silos and make it happen, it will happen. So thank you very much, both of you, for being part of this session.
You're on mute. Please unmute yourself. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you, Baba. I guess all I have to say is that whatever Dr. Mahapatra and Amitav has said are music to our ears. And clearly there are no 2 sides of the table. Everybody is on the same side of the table. Dr. Mahapatra has been interacting with us quite a bit on the scale committee, and his views are consistent with whatever he's been saying in the committee meetings. And Amitav has always been a proponent of simplicity in doing business, and both of you are, in fact, speaking the language that we are speaking. So I'm sure that with two very, very senior and powerful members of the government of India supporting this and wanting this to happen, I'm sure that we will see results. And the 31st March and 15th August dates, something we have noted down. And I think it's going to go a long way in simplifying the business and therefore helping us to move manufacturing forward. Thank you both for attending, and all the other dignitaries from the government who are attending and listening in today. Thank you for your time.
Thank you very much. Thank you, everybody. Thank you, Mr. Amitav Khan. Thank you, Dr. Guru Prasad Mahapatra. Thank you. I must make a very, very special mention of Joint Secretary Radha, who has been actually the person who has been spearheading this behind the scene and very, very quietly with the CII team. So thank you for this, and thank you for all the other government ministries and departments who are participating here. It's been of great value, very valuable evening, this one. And we have taken notes, and this will be taken forward by all our committee chairs and our committee members, as well as the team at CII and the DPIIT will work closely with them so that we are able to take forward. We have got great inputs on the next steps, which we shall. So once again, thank you very much. And we come to the close of this session. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Thanks, Chandraji. Thanks, Pawan.
Thank you, Mr. Kalyani.
Thank you, Baba. Very good session.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Greg.